Aleppo, downtown Homs, and the presidential palace of Assad. So the plan was to take over these satellites and to replace them with fake channels, and then also to have CNN and the BBC and France 24 and the rest of them ready to go with programming that would back up on this brainwashing stuff. The point, though, is that since this was reported so widely before the fact by Maison, I think I contributed something to it. By the time we got to this week, the Syrian information minister came out and said they thought they would surprise us by cutting off our television, which was done now in the last week. But it hasn't worked because they were ready for it, right? They blunted the psychological effect, and they had workarounds. They said, if you can't get us on Arabsat and Nilesat, try another satellite called Atlantic Bird, or you can try other possibilities. In other words, the Syrian channels were putting on public service announcements saying, our station can go off the air at any time, and you will essentially see zombie personnel telling you bad things about Assad and Syria. Don't believe it. This is something we know about. So that didn't pan out. Now, the third one was the attempted decapitation of the Syrian armed forces, and that was last Wednesday, this explosion in one of the main government office buildings in Syria that killed the defense minister, the deputy defense minister, the crisis management director, and then mortally wounded also the intelligence chief. 4 important people were knocked out. Others were wounded. I don't believe that was a suicide bomb. I think that was a drone. That was a missile shot from a drone targeting a specific window and office complex to try to decapitate the Syrian forces. It is interesting that the main victim, the defense minister, Raja, is the top Christian in the Assad government. So there's an extra added venom coming from the al-Qaeda fighters against anybody who's a Christian. And in Syria, you can be a Greek Orthodox, you can be a Maronite, you can be a Greek Catholic, a so-called Melkite. So,
well, let me stop you real quick, Webster. What's your evidence that this was a drone?
No evidence to speak of. It just that this story that it was an infiltrated suicide bomber, I think, stinks, because that's sort of, Operation Splinter Factor, right? That's designed to make people paranoid, right? Is the guy next to me loyal or is he disloyal? But I think it's much more likely to have been a drone. Anyway, there's no proof. This entire assassination story is shrouded in mystery. And I would say, don't forget about the possibility of a cruise missile, of a drone, because the drones are flying all over the place. And why wouldn't they try to do this? Now, the point is that was supposed to lead to the defection of Army units. They said the 4th Armored Division is going to go to pieces. The Republican Guard is going to collapse. None of that happened. And instead, Assad kept control of the situation. He nominated replacements for these guys, and he's continued to sort of reshuffle the top leaders, right? And that's been going on up until today, still going on. So the integrity of the Syrian state apparatus has been maintained. So that was the third point. Fourth point is the U.S. and the British had prepared currency warfare. They were trying to organize a panic run on the Syrian currency to try to collapse it and increase the sense that it's the apocalyptic end of the world, right? So this stuff is going on. That also didn't work. The currency more or less resisted. And then maybe the most dramatic, swarming. It's been now reported that the Syrians have found fighters from Libya, from Egypt, from Jordan, just in the last couple of days. The swarming was another NATO airlift. This is the second time they've done it. It was first done a couple of months ago. But they brought in thousands upon thousands of fanatics, right? Al-Qaeda types, jihadis, mujahideen, unemployed people, mercenaries from all over the Middle East and well beyond, to try to funnel them across the border into Syria just to create chaos and confusion. Now, these people are not really militarily trained. They're not organized into proper military units. Their armament is also maybe a little bit hit or miss. But the idea was that they could go in take over large parts of Damascus, Aleppo, and these other places, and then hold them for long enough to make the Syrian leadership think that the world was coming to an end and they had to run for the hills, right? It's a psychological warfare strategy, as I think we've pointed out. By the way, the kingpin of the psychology warfare side is Ben Rhodes, sitting in the Obama White House. This is the guy who orchestrated Obama's primary campaign. He's the boss of Favreau the last time around, the speechwriter. And the specialty of Ben Rhodes, and it was noted at the time, the Obama campaign wanted to make its opponents in the Democratic primaries think that their world was collapsing, that it was futile to resist Obama, that he was unstoppable, that the battle was over. You know, you might as well go home. That's what they tried to convince the Syrian people of, right? That they were already defeated and they might as well just accept that fact. And it didn't work. So that's the swarming. Now, here's the thing with the swarming. Those foreign fighters, those low-level jihadis, went into Damascus and into Aleppo. In Damascus, they have been smashed. They've been wiped out. A lot of them have simply been exterminated, killed, wounded, missing. Hundreds killed, hundreds captured. So a significant part of the available manpower is now no longer there. In other words, there's a limited supply of these people, right? There's not an infinite number of people who are willing to undertake such a thing. And that is what's happening in Aleppo right now. But even the Washington Post today reports the rebels have lost the gains they made before the bombing in Damascus. They are now being mopped up. So for the Syrian military, it's Operation Mop Up. Now, the other thing is that whole operation, and this is my seventh point, extended into Iraq. Iraq seen as a possible supporter for Assad, under Iranian influence, generally speaking, sympathetic to Assad. So there was what you see today in the last 24 hours, a huge wave of bombings, 100 or more people killed, biggest upsurge since the U.S. forces left. A lot of them did anyway at the end of December. So all of that was supposed to cut off the possibility of getting help from Iraq, and that part has gone on. So you get the idea. All of these seven things, right? The cutting of the supply lines, the action in the United Nations that was vetoed by Russia and China, right? If that had gone the other way, it would have led to panic within Syria. The TV fakery, the drone, drone assassinations to decapitate the government, the attempt to collapse the currency, the swarming of these foreign fighters was an absolutely key part of it. The fact that extended to Iraq. Now, the result is that, again, a lot of those swarming fighters have been wiped out by the Syrian army, which is now methodically mopping up. So where does NATO go from here? They've given it their best shot. That was the perfect storm, and it didn't work. And the continuity of the Syrian government seems to be assured. At that point, they come up and they start whining about chemical weapons. This is obviously an attempt to build a pretext to have an invasion, because the point is you can't overthrow Syria in the way you could Libya. In Syria, the rebels, despite all the aid they've been given, they're absolutely unable to take and hold any city, any town, any part of the country. There just is no place where the rebels can say, this is our fortress and nobody else is coming in here. In Libya, of course, that was very different. The whole south of the country became a springboard for the attack on Gaddafi in Tripoli and the western part. So this adds up to a bad situation for NATO. Either they drop the whole thing or they escalate. And with the escalation, they run into Putin, because Putin is obviously the other side. Putin will retaliate. How will he retaliate? That nobody knows, but people in Washington, London are afraid to find out, because there are things that Putin can do that would make their lives, I think, very, very difficult. The other side of this is the retaliation, I take it, can be seen in some place like Saudi Arabia. A couple of days after the 4 top people in Damascus were killed, by this bomb or rocket or cruise missile, we have a bomb going off at the comparable building in Saudi Arabia. In other words, the Saudi Arabian intelligence and military security headquarters gets bombed, and among the victims is the deputy to Prince Bandar, right? Prince Bandar, sort of below the radar these days, but obviously Prince Bandar being a very important figure in the destabilization of Syria. It is known that Bandar's representatives have taken part in the planning sessions for this television warfare, this video fakery attack, along with the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, along with British and Israeli and other representatives. They've all been in the meetings, but Bandar is sort of the host for these things, and Bandar is the host for building these sets, right, sound stages inside Saudi Arabia, because apparently they're so big that Qatar is too small to hold them, or you can't build them and keep them a secret. So it looks like that was an attempt to kill Prince Bandar, and again, his deputy did succumb. So that's sort of the idea. One of the ways this could end, I think, is that if the U.S. and NATO keep pushing on Syria, this is destabilizing the whole region, and Saudi Arabia is far from being immune. If you get all this, stuff about, democracy and the revolution and so forth, that could turn out very badly for this reactionary feudal royal family of Saudi Arabia, Bandar and all the rest of them, right? The Sudairi clan, the Sudairi wing of the Saudi royal family, because there are things going on in Saudi Arabia of which we know very little. There are demonstrations, there are riots, there are protests that get almost no coverage, no reporting internationally, but they're going on and they're building up. And I would say watch Saudi Arabia in the next week or so. Will that hit on Bandar in his office, will that lead, is that the go for something big inside Saudi Arabia, which is just a guess coming from me at the present time, but at least the attempt to retaliate against Bandar, I think is pretty clear that did occur.
Wow, that is a very high level analysis there that we've been receiving, because we're not getting that information here in the United States. We're getting Syria's got chemical weapons, they're going to use them if attacked, and it's the whole thing, it's kind of the rehash of the Iraqi situation. Right. And that's usually what we see from, U.S. media.
There are a couple of other things that might be of interest. The entire propaganda story of what's going on in Syria is now beginning to fall apart in certain parts of NATO Europe in particular. And that means, first of all, Germany. It's very interesting. In the last couple of days, we have some reports that the German intelligence, the Bundesnachrichtendienst of Pullach in Bavaria, they are now saying that the Syrian rebels are heavily Al-Qaeda. This was already known, but this finds in Germany an echo in some of the big press. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung is the biggest conservative paper in Germany, and already about a month ago, they put out a story saying the Hula massacre of late May, early June. The Hula massacre was not done by the Assad government. The Hula massacre was done by the rebels as a publicity stunt to have it blamed on Assad. So the Frankfurter Allgemeine, that's, I don't know, it's the New York Times or the London Times, or it's an equivalent of this. Now they have now been joined by the Springer press, and this means Die Welt, with programming that would back up on this this brainwashing stuff. The point, though, is that since this was reported so widely before the fact by Maison, I think I contributed something to it. By the time we got to this week, the Syrian information minister came out and said they thought they would surprise us by cutting off our television, which was done now in the last week. But it hasn't worked because they were ready for it, right? They blunted the psychological effect, and they had workarounds. They said, if you can't get us on Arabsat and Nilesat, try another satellite called Atlantic Bird, or you can try other possibilities. In other words, the Syrian channels were putting on public service announcements saying our station can go off the air at any time, and you will essentially see zombie personnel telling you bad things about Assad and Syria. Don't believe it. This is something we know about. So that didn't pan out. Now the third one was the attempted decapitation of the Syrian armed forces, and that was last Wednesday. This explosion in one of the main government office buildings in Aleppo, downtown Homs, and the presidential palace of Assad. So the plan was to take over these satellites and to replace them with fake channels, and then also to have CNN and the BBC and France 24 and the rest of them ready to go